Okay, you're recording your end?
Yep.
Excellent. Hello there, welcome. My name is Dani Henderson. It is a day in June 2023. And as you are well aware, those of you that watch this channel and others, we are full on disclosure. We are riding the tsunami of disclosure and truth of all the goodness in the world and some of the not so goodness in the world. And one of the subjects is how much technology has been hidden, kept, and repressed from us since at least 1897 in the times of my darling Nikola Tesla. Now, my guest today is known as Dave Z-E-D Rossi. He is a research scientist and comes with a body of work and understanding on behind the scenes information. One of the things we can say about Dave Rossi here is that some of the things he has invented have been picked up and noted by the Pentagon. Impressed or not, let's get into it. Dave Rossi, welcome, darling.
Thank you so very much for having me, Danny. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
You know, you came to my attention when you did some work with Dr. Michael Sala and Elena Danaan. These are two very good friends of mine and people I honor and hold up on a very high level because of their humbleness, their love for humanity, and their deep desire to bring truth on and off our planet. It is clear now in the realms of everything that people are now open-minded enough to accept that we share this planet with the rest of the galactic cosmos, that there are other brothers and sisters here already from other planets. The UFOs are largely flown by extraterrestrials and our Earth military. This is some of the shock and horror that's come out that's upset people, of course. Sorry about that. Too bad, so sad. We're in it now. We need to deliver the information. A lot of reverse engineered technology that I heard someone say the other day, oh, there's been so many alien crashes. No, there haven't. There have been deliberately left craft on the planet. There have been one or two accidents by more nefarious alien beings who were stopped and cut down, but there aren't nearly as many accidents as you are led to believe. So we have to be extremely careful who we choose to believe out there and who we put up as a figure of authority. When I say no one above another. And in terms of Dr. Sala, Elena Danaan, for example, Dave Rossi, I heard you say very clearly one day that science and agencies and government units literally are watching Elena Danaan, reading her books, watching her broadcasts, and listening to what she is saying. Can you name any of these bodies, any of the people that you claim to know that have said these things about Elena Danaan, please?
Sure. Well, with respects to the surveillance of Elena Danaan, as well as a handful of others, to be fair and transparent, but specifically with Miss Danaan, it is of my understanding that certain elements of Air Force intelligence, in addition to other elements, for example, we see, let's say, the Battelle Memorial Institute, which is speculated to be a CIA funded type sort of institution of sorts. Those would just be two of the different bodies or sub bodies or elements within the larger institutions that are surveilling Miss Danaan and others like Miss Danaan, largely because it is of my understanding, based on my own personal research amongst experiences both in the laboratory and otherwise, that the non-physical and the concept of spreading information and knowledge in and of itself is the, dare I say, the arming of the armor that is necessary for people like yourself, myself, and others to be equipped with, if you will. And this surveillance is to ensure that the tracking of certain things that are said, for example, by individuals such as yourself and Ms. Danaan, are at the very least followed by these certain elements and or sub-elements of the agency, so as to ensure that there can be an attempt, not a successful one, but an attempt to keep a foothold on the propagation and dissemination of certain pieces of information and certain narratives, so as to continue to influence what is called SQ or subquantum mechanics, particularly dealing with intent and thought. And I'll sort of bring this full circle by stating that it is of my humble opinion, as well as many others behind the scenes, that the angle and perspective of internal belief and thinking, just absorbing words and acknowledging them in a conscious regard, ultimately changes what we call matter, whether it is on a very small level or on a very grand level. And so, for example, it is of my humble opinion that when we see, not necessarily always, but when there are cases that are irrefutable by many eyewitnesses of, for example, birds or planes being seen frozen in the sky, it is of my understanding this is a direct result of mass intention questioning the status quo in the mainstream establishment narrative, thanks to people like yourself, thanks to people like Mrs. Danon, and many, many others as well. But in terms of groups that would be surveilling such, it would be mainly Air Force intelligence, certain elements of private industry of military contractors, as well as other institutions such as Battelle Memorial Institute and some others.
Okay, so back to that, just to get a bit more intel. Also, what I see you speaking as, I see you speaking to the science of noetics, noetic science, and some of the thought processes and subquantum mechanics, which I want to come back to in a moment. But for now, you mentioned the Battelle Memorial Institute, which is a division of the CIA. Who is Battelle? What is Battelle? And who there is surveilling Elena Danaan and Dr. Michael Salla?
Well, specifically, what we see with Battelle in particular is that their full name, I believe, is the Battelle Memorial Institute, as you just stated, and they're responsible for analyzing and looking at different, we could say, metallurgies or materials and or metamaterials of sorts. Now, when it comes to direct specific surveillance, forgive me, as unfortunately on the record, I cannot go into specific names, but what I can tell you is that there are divisions and groups within there that are directly interacting with both these materials and with what you could call, what people have often called Kossarov mirrors, for example, to then use intent to essentially tap the ether using the soul instead of the physical body to then directly surveil via what some could call psychokinesis or remote viewing to observe Mrs. Danon, as well as, if I must be honest, others in your community as well, including perhaps even myself as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned Kossarov mirrors. Are you also talking about what we know to be timeline or looking glass technology?
Yes, precisely. For example, there was a newspaper clipping of which, unfortunately, I don't have off the top of off right now, but I can send to you afterwards, of an Italian newspaper in the 1970s stating that the Vatican had an ability to go look both in the past and in the alleged future of certain timelines. It was printed entirely in Italian and was then later retracted, and nothing was ever written about it again. But these are the same types of technological or materials that are being used to interact directly with human consciousness for the sake of intent and surveillance for certain elements of, again, Air Force intelligence, certain elements of CIA, and others.
Okay. So you mentioned the Battelle. How do you spell it? Is it a P for Percy or a B for Bertie?
It is Battelle.
Battelle. Battelle.
Battelle, yes, correct.
So it has its root in French. I don't know.
One thing I can tell you, if I may say, Dani, I've never said publicly before that I'd love to say on your show here, is that Battelle Memorial Institute was responsible for analyzing some of the metallurgies or the pieces of metal, particularly of the magnesium bismuth, that was passed through the hands of people such as Linda Moulton Howe and others. Battelle had come out, I believe, some months ago, if not maybe a few years ago, approximately, and stated that there was no significance to this particular metal. It is of my strong understanding that Battelle blatantly lied. Mm-hmm. They had tested it they tested it in the laboratory. Certain phenomenon effects did occur, and what they put on the final report and analysis was that nothing happened, when that was quite to the contrary.
Thank you for saying that. It's been very sad to me lately to witness some of the people who've been long-term UFO reporters, let's say. And now I see them getting together on those ancient alien type episodes and saying fear and doom and gloom, and, the earth could be cracked open like a nut from, off-planet species. And it's lies. It's absolute lies. And it's designed to put fear into the humans so they will kowtow to the governments and listen to what the useless, corrupt governments on the planet, which everybody knows. I mean, what you and I are sharing, apart from a couple of things you just landed there, is old news. And it is time that we just go there, have the courage and the love for our brothers and our sisters on and off planet to tell the truth. We've had many, many different materials that have been recovered off planet that are used in other arenas, not for the masses, for the few. Now let's go to the Air Force departments that you mentioned. You mentioned that they are in particular surveilling Elena Danan, Dr. Michael Sala. I'm sure Chris O'Connor, who's also brought space technology here in the form of the Dean's device, which is a crystal magnetic handheld free energy device that actually helps to promote the piezoelectricity in our pineal gland, which is one of the worst things. The powers that think they are trying to prevent us, the human, from really recognizing what incredible organic technology we truly are, the power that we truly have embodied in this vessel that we inhabit right now. Can you tell me any of the Air Force departments that are particularly following and observing Elena Danan?
Specifically, what I can tell you is that there is, in terms of a department, or dare I say a sub-department, one thing I can tell you is that this is the first time I'm actually saying this publicly. There would be elements out of what we know as the Aerospace Corporation that would be specifically surveilling certain individuals. And I don't want to, unfortunately, forgive me, at least publicly on the record, I don't want to get into specific detail as to the intricacies of how such operates. But what I can tell you is that there are certainly people that consider it a job to surveil Ms. Danan, amongst others, for many hours a day, and weaponize and utilize stigma in an attempt to discredit her and others as well.
Right, I get it. I understand. And when you say aerospace, that covers so many global entities. Myself, I was in the space industry for some years.
Forgive me. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Dani. The name of the company is Aerospace Corporation, founded in 1960.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. And possibly under that umbrella or holding company comes companies like Metro Marconi Space, who I worked for years, Astrium, Marconi, Oscillations, British Aerospace. Globally, there are so many different factions, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman.
We can go, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, BAE.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit. We can go even, let me think as well. Honeywell would be another one. These corporations in particular would be the ones that largely have biological and physical materials.
Right. And also, I suppose in their position, if you're watching a woman on this planet who is standing on stage at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection, the conference that we all attended last October that is happening again this October, Elena Danan stood on stage and gave a download by download by download, the physics, the chemistry, the propulsion, the thermal, the composite materials of a lot of these craft and how they actually work. And we're very grateful to her for having the courage to come forward, because why wouldn't we have the courage? Every single being on our planet deserves to know the reality of their planet on and off planet. Nobody is allowed to keep information. You're not allowed. It's very simple. Naughty, naughty. Now,
I completely agree with that. Yes.
Right. Now let's talk a bit about the labs, the laboratories that you are aware of that are also working on information or surveillance around people like Elena. Can you suggest any of those? All very fascinating.
Sure. There's one a location of surveillance with respects to at least what people could call psychotronics or psychotronic induced effects, to whether it is manipulate the weather or affect people in individuals or in larger groups, et cetera, et cetera. One of these facilities would be specifically within the Huntsville, Alabama area in particular, of which there has been, admittedly circumstantial, but vast amounts of circumstantial evidence that has been compiled by the likes of, for example, people such as Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden and others over the years, where there's clearly been, from a scientific and specifically quantum physics perspective, an aggregation of data that represents and signifies various energy forms. Now, I'm careful to say weapons, although, again, let's not be naive here as well, in the sense that I'm certain that they're being used. Various forms of such to surveil, alter, influence, induce, whether it's human behavior, human weather, human environments on a micro or macro scale. And this can all be done through the interaction of the mind, both locally, non-locally, and electromagnetically.
Perfect. Now, you mentioned psychotronic psionics. This also can lend itself to the label of MK Ultra, the mind being interfered with on many different levels, being controlled, being brainwashed, which we know we sit in front of a TV for a day. Hello, your consciousness has been taken over. Your subconscious is being programmed, whether you're aware of it or not. It's always interesting to me how in life in general, we have these pre-programmed responses to something. Like, let's take a woman who is unable to fall pregnant, and unconsciously people will say to her, stop being desperate, please relax. And these are really unkind things to say to someone. These are not coming from the heart, they're coming from the mind, which is not attached to an emotion that needs to be there for the person struggling. We have many, many different responses, and they're automatic. It's like there was this whole mind control game playing over the last couple of years where people are saying, don't worry, the bad guys in the governments have all been arrested and they're all in Gitmo. You know, who, where, show me the proof. But people were responding because they heard that, and then they're puppeting out there. And it's caused great harm. And my own personal life has been harshly affected by such puppets talking rubbish and nonsense. But there is a attack on truth. There's always been an attack on truth. I want to go back to the Huntsville Space Agency there. And again, we have the European Space Agency, which I was connected to years ago, the ESA. And I think it's time that humanity recognizes there is no father as such, no daddy to go to and say, Daddy, can you tell me what's happening? Because those daddies, man, they're lying. They be lying to the children. We are no longer children. We are fully grown adults, and we demand to know the truth. And if we don't get it from the daddies that set themselves up, we are going to find it elsewhere. I want to step back gently also into IONS, which is the Institute of Noetic Science. Now, just a sidestep, your last drop on your channel, Dave Z, you say, you take apart the word directions, and you have the last part as ions, ionic sphere, ionosphere, etc. Ions.
Right.
Noetic science is not an emerging science. It is a long-term, long-form, recognized science. And I want to thank Dean Radin. Don't know him personally, but I know he created that scientific body of work. And very briefly to people, the easiest way to imagine what noetic science is, there was an old man who was dying. He agreed to be weighed on death and seconds after death to see whether or not the human soul, the energetic presence of our soul in this vessel, had a weight to it, a weight to it. And sure enough, he was weighed right as he died. He was weighed seconds after, and he was within seconds much lighter, because his soul, our soul, has an actual physical weight to it. I myself witnessed someone die in my arms, and I witnessed their soul come out of their mouth. I never imagined anything like that would happen, Dave. It happened. So don't tell me that souls don't have their own life force, that we are of that energy that is our innate energy, and truths like that will no longer be held from us. Now,
if I may say very quickly, Dani, if I may add to that, from a scientific perspective, the idea of plasma being the fourth state of matter and or acting as a transition state between what you would call the ether and this physical reality, I think that is a direct substantiation to provide direct evidence to everything you're stating there, particularly having to do with what is called longitudinal infolding of Bohmian mechanics. This is something for those maybe in your audience interested in the science. This gives direct credence and substantiation to the idea of a bioplasmic matrix residing within our body or carbon container, if you will, that is tethered to a non-local source, which speaks to Roger Penrose, for example, stating that in his opinion, he cannot state what consciousness is so much as what it isn't, and what it certainly is not is it is not computational, which then gives direct credence to free will and such. So just wanted to add that in there, but thank you.
I love that. And also the non-local energy that we are tethered to. There are those on the planet who would love to plug us into a computational mainframe, which of course is not to happen because we don't allow it. Now, please, I want to just turn over to you. Share with us some of the things that you have ready of your own body of work and your own passions, Dave Rossi.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Well, there's quite a bit that's being worked on. I can tell you behind the scenes that hopefully in the coming months and hopefully within the next say year at most will hopefully come to fruition. These are various projects, not just one project. Some of them have to do with, for example, medical apparatuses. A handful of these projects, as a matter of fact, I've already filed patents for. I've been granted a handful of them, but not been granted for all of them. And so there are certain technologies utilizing, for example, lasers. Now, when we think of lasers, and when we talk about, but even a laser that one can order off of Amazon, for example, that's what we're discussing here. But it is not necessarily new science so much as it is new perspectives on old and suppressed science, as you said very eloquently, back to circa 1897, excuse me, of Nikola Tesla, and perhaps even before then with regards to suppression. When, for example, the science that I'm exploring, one can call it quantum mechanics. We even call it, dare I say, etheric or esoteric. Some call it, fringe science, but I prefer the term out of the box. Some of it has to do directly with this idea that whenever we think of, for example, the way that unfortunately our world governments currently and militaries develop bombs, what's being used there is a combination of course, heat, light, microwave energy, and all of this. But when the particles interact, what's happening is the particles are actually fighting with one another. And I liken this very much to Einstein when he said that if one cannot explain a scientific concept to a 5-year-old, then one has not fully grasped it. And I say that because the antithesis or the opposite of these particles fighting is, in fact, when these particles make love. Now, when they make love, they do something called phase conjugate. And maybe this is a term that some of you and your lovely audience may have heard before. This is essentially a proper alignment electromagnetically with any type of material that one is experimenting with in the laboratory that does not induce an explosion, but rather induces a different effect. And that different effect is something along the lines of what, for example, we can call gravitational, for example. Now, what I mean by that is if we think of electric permittivity and magnetic permeability or electromagnetism as a fundamental basis or a building block for gravity and other incredible energetic phenomenon for healing and many other things. If we think of the male archetype as the divine masculine, which represents electricity, and the female archetype as the divine feminine, which represents magnetism. What happens is that when a male and a female, when they fight, whether it's verbal or very unfortunately, dare I say, physical, there's no result of such. But when they make love, what ends up happening is quite often they produce a child. Now, if we apply that same concept philosophically and scientifically to physics, what we'll find is that when electricity and magnetism have certain conditions that are then met at, ironically enough, their crystalline 0 point, what you then have is the birth child of electricity and magnetism, the child that comes from that initial summing of the vectors to 0 is gravity. Now, from that, you then get a plethora of different types of effects. For example, if one takes 2 photons and merges them together in a synchronistic way where they interweave, sort of like a ball weaving through fibers to make a thread in a Dyson sphere type situation, what you then have from that is a new type of photon, but a different type of photon in which is smaller than the initial 2, but significantly stronger in various ways than the initial 2 as well. And so what you start to have from that one there is then even when that one merges with another photon, you then have even a completely different type of birth above that as well. And so if we were to visualize the process that I'm explaining here, we would essentially have an ebb and flow sort of system that is also representative of our DNA, which is also representative of course, the caduceus, the double helix, the Naga, the Kabbalah, many other things. So these are some of the things that I myself am exploring in a way that truly, I mean, it puts, I will say this, and it is controversial, but it puts many industries that rely on the suppression of knowledge amongst the masses. It puts them out of business within a second. And I can say that I know for a fact I've seen some things in some facilities that I'm currently trying to work on getting out, in which it should have, let's just say, if our, as you say, Dani, if our leaders truly had our best interests in mind, these revelations would have been revealed many decades ago. I'm very I'm very disappointed in a passionate sense that there were strong revelations made within particle physics many decades ago that were not revealed or discussed whatsoever, to the point where any scientists that discovered them had to essentially stumble upon it themselves. Dare I say, a mystery school within the academic system itself. And so that's why, for example, when we have certain academics that come out, whether a North American or European or you name it, and they say, well, no, this won't work because of this, this, and that. I would dare to wager to a very strong degree, and I'm not a betting person, that these same individuals that are saying the certain things that will not work or trying to attack certain new scientific revelations are the same people that privately are also being paid to say such publicly, and are also the same people that are privately working on the things they say publicly don't work.
You know, there's so much, so much to unpack there, but I'm just going to be brief about a couple of things. The repression of technology and medicines is a crime against an atrocity that is unfathomable. Those
Yes.
who prevented humans and their offspring from being cured the natural, easy way that it was intended will all stand accountable. Nobody will get away. Even if they've crossed over, their name will be spoke. Years ago, when I had my clinic as a clinical hypnotherapist in Harley Street, London, a man came to me, a scientist, let's call him Dr. Richard. He had discovered that by taking the male urine and harvesting cells, he could tell what the PSA was in the prostate gland, because a lot of men have had and suffer with prostate cancer. My own husband, ex-husband now, had prostate cancer, and I witnessed him having the most agonizing biopsy up his anal canal into the prostate and a puncture taken of that. And it was, and I heard other men that had the same thing, and my heart went out for them. And then when I discovered Dr. Berry, or he discovered me and came to me to tell me this, I was beyond excited that this pain that men have to go through will be no more, will be no more. Well, his work was repressed, of course. It was completely repressed. And all of us probably have a story similar, you know, like that, where we know something, it's amazing, it's coming out, it's going to help humanity, and then it doesn't. And it's just so wrong. And like you say, when all the technology comes out to aid humanity in medicine and every imaginable way we can think of, propulsion, flight, everything, there will be many industries that go down in one day. And we will know how much we've been repressed and held back. And it was for money and power, greed and gain. That was all. That was the reasoning. It wasn't for the benefit of anybody. It was to stifle, stop, and hold a handful of people, families, individuals. At the very beginning, they took transport, they took oil, they took petroleum, they took electricity, they took whatever, direct current instead of alternating current. I mean, all of these things that we've come to understand, each one was passed off into the hands of someone, and they ran with it, and they repressed the entire planet, judiciary, legal, etc., everything. And now it's great unraveling, the awakening, whatever you want to call it, you know, really. I'm really happy for you that some of the projects you work on and the people you work with are definitely patented and coming out. Now, a lot of the medicines, for example, have been blocked by a certain agency. You have to go through the agency to get your, you know, the level of drugs or medicine passed. And if people just took a minute to see who started those agencies, who is behind the heads of everything, who is behind the no that comes from people, and also the knowing that we are designed to live a minimum of 130 years. Nobody wants to live that long under the system that we're repressed in globally. Jesus, no, thank you. But that's coming out too. I interviewed a woman privately this week who claims to have a medical bed that harnesses the ether, the aorta, or whatever, you know, like Tesla already figured out how to harness the energy of the planet, that he ran through his Walden Bridge tower that he built to show that we don't need power stations, right? It's free energy. And it was blocked by Edison and Morgan and others. That's common knowledge.
If I may add very quickly, Dani, to with respects to the unfortunate but real crimes against humanity, essentially, at least on the surface of this planet, with respects to the suppression of a lot of this technology. What's so, dare I say, criminal that really bothers me is that we find, for example, whether it has to do with medical healing capabilities or propulsion or other things as well, that honestly we can argue are indiscernible from magic in a positive sense. A lot of these capabilities, believe it or not, are used at a very, very, very low minimal extent within certain industries. And I will give you two practical examples of such: X-rays and MRIs. Those same technologies, in fact, can enable other things that have just simply not been applied, and then when attempted to be applied, either get suppressed. I have actually been blown away myself with, I've met a lot of fantastic people in the last couple of years within the scientific community around the world, both government, military funded, and private. But one thing that I find quite incredible is the amount of parroting and not genuine reading of the actual sources of information that so many individuals do with respects to just repeating talking points. And one thing I found is that I would dare to wager that a good chunk of the professors, at least in North America, have not read the original papers when it comes to electromagnetism. They have read what others have wrote about the original papers, but they have not read the actual sources themselves. And then again, as time goes on, there are forces that are attempting, similar forces that are again the same ultimately energetic force behind those that are attempting to surveil positively oriented individuals such as yourself, Ms. Danon, and others. They are attempting to ensure that as time goes on, it is more difficult to find these original papers. And it's interesting because these original papers started surfacing in terms of realization of what this energy can do by using both the planet and the ether circa late 1880s. So
amazing point to make, and absolutely so true. The withholding of all of the information and repression of people that come forward and speak truth.
If I may say, sorry, very quickly, Dani, there was an attempt in the early to mid 90s to bring out some of this propulsion with respects to specifically magnetohydrodynamics. And some of that had to do with an attempt to approach some of the Middle Eastern and American oil companies and asking them to underwrite the developments of these magnetohydrodynamic plans so that there would be a transition from the fossil industry into the, dare I say, low-level anti-gravity sort of zero-point energy field. It completely got squashed. But I will say that there have been attempts by certain individuals to a large degree, but unfortunately it sort of became a them versus the world situation, and they kind of had no choice but to pull back.
Yeah, and again, the truth is that in this year of 2023, we are so far behind our brothers and our sisters and our ancestors from the past. We're still in our 3D minds trying to figure out, how did they build the pyramids? It took thousands of millions of slaves. No talk of sound technology, sound healing, none of that. Although in the disclosure press club last week, Dr. Greer and I forget the lovely man's name, but I was so happy that he was talking about these monolithic slabs that were floating in the air. And I'm like, yes, finally, we have an honest voice from the military, because they all have this technology. They know, how they laugh at humanity, how they laugh at how stupid we are, when a lot of us know the reality and the truth. And I'm really proud of that guy. And he made me cry watching it, because he was so broken and shattered. He lost his own dad, and there was another guy who was also very broken by his experiences, whose wife was frozen in place when a craft came, but what he was seeing was a human run craft, and he was able to stand in his truth and deliver it. And I feel so sad. I have such compassion for everybody who's suffered so much to bring truth and reality, and all of those who've lost their lives, whether it was time for them to go or not in their natural timeline, their divine plan, blueprint. Very, very sad, but so lovely that so many are coming forward. I want to jump back to the medbed I spoke about. This lady that I interviewed, she's telling me that they have a medbed that has a certain frequency that is able to propulse out and harness the aether or ether. A lot of people have different ways of saying that word, but the energy of the planet basically, and then run it through, arc it through this medbed that then can pick up on the actual blueprint of the being inside of it. So for example, if there is a limb missing, it can actually create the original blueprint and help develop, which sounds so scientific and so like, made up. But I know other people in real time on this planet, Tony Rodriguez for one, Chris O'Connor for another, Jean-Charles Moyan for another. These guys are all on my channel, guys. If you've never heard of them, they're on this channel here and at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection as speakers. They've all seen this incredible technology that the military have, that they use off planet. So when they've thrown their soldiers to the other species that may not be friendly on other planets, let's say Mars, for example. And again, guys, if I lose you at this point, I send you my love. Bye-bye. We ain't got no more time for skeptics because you guys are you're in the rearview mirror at this stage. And I know it's shocking to hear some of the things we're talking about, but we've got no time to care about your feelings because feelings are what get us in trouble in the first place. Now we need facts. So this technology does exist. Soldiers upstairs that have been taken in Earth military programs off planet who have lost arms or legs have been re-engineered inside these medical beds. Yes, they have. The dear hope is that this technology will be released on the planet and many people will be able to have parts of them repaired. We hope that, sincerely hope that. Then we get people saying, what about my this and what about my that? I've been told that they are manufacturing med beds on the moon, which has been established. It's such old news. So many humans on the moon, humans on Mars, humans in Jupiter, humans in Neptune and other beings, that these medical beds on the moon in particular are coming. They will be in all hospitals on the planet. They will be free. They will be free for humanity to use. That is what I have been told directly. Over to you, Dave.
Yes, no problem. Thank you so much. Actually, as a matter of fact, I would even take it one step further as to state that for a practical, we could say, perspective of med beds, there actually was, there were a handful of them manufactured, I believe, in France under the funding of the French government many decades ago. And if I may share my screen to an actual slide showcasing this, this showcases the work of Antoine Prieur. Now, he was treating small animals in this particular laboratory of his, and it was using, for example, plasmas, non-linear optics, which is just a fancy way of saying basically spirals of light, essentially, and many other elements where essentially, as a matter of fact, he unofficially, and I say unofficially in the sense that he was not sanctioned or allowed to, but he had done it multiple times over. He had in fact treated humans as well. So what we see here with this coil where my mouse is that we had, what he had rather, excuse me, was a plasma mixing tube inside. And then what would happen is the animal would be placed right underneath and they would be healed, but this would also be the case with humans as well, regardless of what the person was feeling, whether it was something more mental having to do with depression or something of the sort, or if it was something physical as simple as a broken limb or bone or something of the sort. It would literally restore via that of the potentials within the ether. This utilizes, for those more scientifically oriented, the A field, which is the magnetic vector potential field, to then extract from the ether different types of outcomes of that regrowing and regeneration of its respective cell, limb, tissue, etc. And so this work was being done before it was later then shut down and suppressed. I believe this was, I think, the circa 1950s. So again, it's for those that say, well, the medbed stuff is nonsense. I would very strongly beg to differ with significant substantiating evidence. Particularly, for example, if even for you and your audience that may be interested, anyone looking into, now, unfortunately, this is where a lot of reading would have to come into play because there's just so much out there in the peer-reviewed literature, but it doesn't go past that, interestingly enough. Anyone looking into phase conjugation for medical healing, for example, would be a direct build upon of what we're discussing. So in other words, basically, the papers, what's very interesting is that small scale lab experiments are done for healing of animals, growth, regeneration, all of this. But what's very interesting is that there's all these papers written, the papers, and I've read many of them myself, whether they're from the North America, Latin America, you name it, Europe. A lot of them tend to be actually from formerly the Soviet Union or Soviet countries. And there's a history there, but a lot of them, of these papers end with, there are strong, significant implications in various fields for this. And then the paper just, you don't hear anything from after that. Because again, this then goes back to, up until recently, the suppression of the system at large. But in terms of those saying that it's not there or it's not possible, think of everything that was just presented, that both Dani stated and myself just presented, but then scale it up to an extent that is far more advanced than we could perhaps fathom.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, there's a lot of people that are still stuck in the 3D model on our planet about how they're going to become rich, how they're going to become billionaires, because that was a manipulation on the planet. Look over here, be a footballer. Look over here, be a singer, an actor, an actress. What they don't know is the ramifications of that, and the dark spelling, the black magic side, the occult side, because people also miss the fact that on our planet, the ancient spells, the ancient occult still exists. And the
Yes.
dark people that run the planet, they use it. They use it. And
And I think, dare I say, they use, for example, they use the egregore of money to be a constant system that is continuously then fed into just by people thinking about money, which brings us full circle to the beginning of our recording here, which is the idea of subquantum mechanics, where just the thought of something affects the everything, matter, local environment, from the micro to the macro.
So true, so true. And again, people go, well, then what happens now? Then what will I do? Well, stop worrying about it. Stop going into fear. You don't have to fix. You just have to fix you, each individual, loving on you, loving on that inner child, dissolving your own pain inside of yourself as everything else around you is being recovered. We have to recover ourselves internally as an individual spark, a fractal spark of the divinity that we are, and we're seeing a planet that's trying to be controlled and enslaved by a group of numbskulls. I call them the retardos. If you look in the dictionary, retard, the word retard, that's been applied to our beautiful, non-verbal, somewhat challenged in our 3D mind. Right. Some of the brightest sparks, the energy of them, the genius of them, but the fractals at the top of the planet, that they deserve the word retard, in my opinion. The soulless, heartless, dark ones that are being exposed.
When there's conscious manipulation of, and they know what they're doing, and I believe it's this is a Mr. Carlin quote. I believe that the comedian, if I remember correctly, when he said they know, and they know that we know, and they know that we know that they know, and they still don't do anything about it.
Right. And they're in a club that none of us are invited to join. Yeah, I remember that.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Let's go more into your slides that you have and some of the information that you want to share for our brothers and our sisters.
Sure, absolutely. One thing I can tell you is that one of the messages that I like to present and would love to present to yourself and your audience is the before going into some more of the slides is, for example, the idea that one does not need to understand the complexities of physics or any type of science to be able to grasp this energy and to even, dare I say, make this energy. And forgive me if this sounds a little bit of a sort of self-promoting angle, but in addition to what I do for the consulting for my company, on the side as well, we have a Patreon where patreon.com/GenerationZ, where we discuss and have Zoom calls and discuss these type of things in an attempt to simplify for many people, the same way that we discussed about 20-30 minutes ago, the idea of electromagnetism creating a child that is then birthed from that, and that child is gravity and it continues to build from there. We try and give those type of examples with respects to allowing people to realize that, again, our ancestors, in which had this good chunk of this knowledge and technology, they were not running, for example, metric tensor coefficients and all this type of very high-end quantum physics level stuff. they had a very basic understanding of the ether, of reality, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact that they were able to grasp it without the needing of this stigma in which various negative elements of intelligence, military intelligence in particular, try and continue to disseminate. And that stigma is the idea of, oh, okay, for example, in the finance world, only the Wall Street guys know what they're doing. In the science world, only the scientists, the respected ones know what they're doing. And for the sake of not having your channel removed, we can also use another recent example as well, medically. But we see that regardless of the field, this goes back to that same group of individuals at the top, whether material or otherwise, acting through a material human, or maybe not, enabling this idea of intellectual and spiritual, mainly suppression. Where it's, again, this intimidation factor of, oh my God, I see the word quantum and I see all these equations and I see these articles and I don't even know where to start. That unfortunately has been a part of the plan to attempt to suppress people from grasping a lot of these concepts, in my opinion. And so one of the things we try and do, both publicly on the show and of course more on the Patreon, just due to the limited time of my schedule these days, because of all the different things that I'm doing, we try and break that down and gain more of a comprehensive understanding of this energy and knowledge. And from there, it can then be applied to, I dare say, every aspect of life, which is why I think this is just a personal theory of mine, that when we look at people like Leonardo da Vinci, Plato, Nostradamus, many of these, highly respected individuals, they were not just mathematicians. They were also alchemists. They were astronomers. They were writers. They were, you name it. And I think my theory for this is because when one begins to realize that the same underlying concepts that are used to tap, for example, gravity/anti-gravity, can also be applied to healing, can also be applied to telekinesis, can also be applied to even understanding yourself in a spiritual sense. This is what they understood and what they saw that many others didn't. So they were able to take this knowledge, because this knowledge arguably is acts as the sort of blueprint or framework of this, at least of this material reality, and apply it to each facet of their interests, because by definition it is the structure of what we're living within. And so people may say, well, okay, what is it, Dave? Well, one can argue that in terms of tapping gravity, or in a propulsion sense, there is, yes, in fact, a secret sauce, if you will. Now, aside from that secret sauce enables, if one has the spiritual, in my opinion, capability to be open to such, not necessarily intellectual, but the spiritual openness to realize that the same method for tapping anti-gravity is the same method that also enables a cohesive understanding of philosophy, as well as being able to tap medical healing, telekinesis, everything that everyone has essentially ever wanted, that everyone thought was just something you'd see in a movie. Again, these are just my words. Hopefully there will be more of a physical proof soon enough from my end and from some others' ends as well. But this is essentially what we try and allow for people to have, an environment where they have that aha moment for themselves. And what I mean by that is, sure, the secret sauce may be one thing to one person, but then it's another path of realization to another. And what I mean by that is everyone is realizing the same thing, but they're interpreting it in their own way spiritually, if that makes sense, intuitively. So this goes back to the very famous phrase I like to use, which is, try not to understand something, but feel it. And so that's what we try and do with regards to combining both physics and metaphysics, particularly on our YouTube channel and on our Patreon as well. But that's one of the things that really motivates me and gets me out of bed in the morning, because yes, although I personally dive into the equations and the very heavy physics of it, it's become a passion of mine. I can say with full certainty that if one is trying to understand all of this, it does not take much. As a matter of fact, I'd go as far as to say it has to do with electrostatic resonance, for example, for one as one example. Now, to sort of put the icing on the cake of this, for those that are saying, Dave, you're talking a good talk, but let's give a practical example. Well, let's say, Danny, you, me, and for example, let's say Elena were to stand on a carpet in a triangular formation and we would hook big elastic bands to each other's legs. My right leg would then be hooked to your left leg, and then your right leg to Elena's left leg, and so on back to mine and so forth. If we start moving our feet on the carpet, and then we start touching a nearby doorknob and give that spark or shock, that is basically, albeit an oversimplified, but that is a fundamental description of what people can have called a TR3B, or triangle UFO, whether human or non-human could be operating in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. It's interesting. It puts me in mind of the original periodic table, because if you look at it now, there are elements missing. There are elements that have been removed off of the original periodic table.
There are also things in physics, forgive me, that have been just blatantly suppressed and lied about as well, specifically in electromagnetism.
100%, 100%, yeah. So when people want to go down and study, they got to get off the bloody internet. Wikipediapedia, run by the PDOs. People like Dr. Christiane Northrup, a legend in female medicine and gynecology, now is called a conspiracy theorist. Kathy O'Brien, a whistleblower on the CIA and being trafficked in terrible ways. Oh my God. You look at her,
yes.
She's a conspiracy theorist. It's evil. If people can't look and go, oh my gosh, this woman's gone through so much, and then you look her up, her body of work, her bravery, her putting her life on the line, and some numbnut has written that she's a conspiracy theorist, you've got to make your own mind up. Can you not see what's in front of you, people? Like, really, we're at that stage. So much to say to what you just said, but I also wrote down a couple of notes, because you mentioned Leonardo da Vinci. Now, there was a list. It was Sir Isaac Newton, Newtonian physics. It was da Vinci. It was so many others that brought us incredible phenomena. Da Vinci brought us the aspects and imagery of helicopters in flight, and so much more. He also brought us the image of what is known as Vitruvian Man, which was an outline of a man with 4 legs, but he basically is set up as the original blueprint of human mankind. And if you overlay geometry over him, what I believe he was trying to show us was we come to understand that sound and frequency and harmony becomes something. It becomes a thing, like our soul, this energetic soul that has a weight. What we're talking about here with Vitruvian Man is pointing the directional mind to focus on the fact that we are discussing how matter is made. It is the building blocks of matter, we are told. Now, I know a lot of the thinking is designed to make us think the way they want us to, but I do believe that. Because again, look under any cell. Look at all the geometra imprints that we have in every cell of our body and other areas, and it reproduces out there. You could say Fibonacci sequence.
Dani, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say that if one, and now I do have to be careful with mentioning certain names here, but if one were to look at certain scientists, at least within North America, for example, that have been, let's say, hovering around the UAP or UFO topic, or paranormal even, for many decades now, sort of individuals that have been in it for the long game, if you will. One thing that you'll find, and I say this to add to everything you're saying, Dani, is that you'll find a lot of these scientists, they get consulted on for various things. For example, they get consulted on for propulsion, but then immediately from there, after that, they'll then get consulted on for medical treatment. And people say, well, hold on, if scientists, the word science is, science itself is a big field. Usually scientists, you have a laser physicist, or you have, a material physicist. You have different types of physicists that look, you have a biophysicist, and they all kind of specialize in their own subgroups respectively. Well, here's the thing. When one taps this, dare I say, secret sauce, what you then have is the ability to apply it to everything, because it is everything. And so that's why some of these scientists have the ability to jump, say, from one day to working on propulsion to suddenly working on something having to do with the brain or the human biofield, because you find that the structure of the human cells, in direct interaction and correspondence with the ether and the local vacuum, as it's been more mainstream labeled as, underlies the same geometries, no matter what.
Yeah, underlies the same geometries, absolutely.
Yes.
Other place I'd like people to start thinking or reminding their beautiful selves is, we have when I say that humanity today, we are so far behind the ancients, the ancestors who had all the technology, who were propulsing, who were flying, who were this, who were that. If you look at the NASCAR lines in Peru, the NASCAR lines, the giant, beautiful hieroglyphics that are miles long of a spider and a hummingbird and a this and a that. People are like, ooh, how did they get built? Ooh, and then we have other ancient civilizations and remnants of, and people say, well, there are no roads. No, because they were bloody flying. They knew how to
I
fly.
mean, well, Danny, to give an example to your lovely audience, that if we look back at the suppressed history of even airships pre-World War II, we see, for example, that was being done, and it seemed to be done in a pneumatic oriented way, in the sense of some type of form of I say this in a sort of half sarcastic way, because I, not to boast, but I know I'm fairly certain I know how it was done. They were using pneumatic valves and different types of compressed air to not necessarily generate anti-gravity, but to generate what is called LTA, or lighter than air aircraft. And so if we don't need to really look that far back to realize that even if we go on Wikipedia and inquire about airships on Wikipedia, there's nothing that really says what happened to them, so to speak. Now, I could be wrong as of the time of this recording, but if there is anything on there that says that there was some type of, they were deemed insufficient for use or something of this type, I will say that it is of my opinion that is just a blatant lie, because continuing with the airships post World War II would have enabled an ability for people to realize that, again, things like electroculture, electrofarming, using compressed air in combination with electricity in particular, can enable very clean, efficient ways of propulsion, farming, etc., that of course could not be controlled.
You could also look at Concorde, supersonic flight, right? We had that
Yep.
technology from the early 60s, right?
Yes.
Concorde. And it was such a short flight to New York from England, let's say. And there were 5 or 6 of these Concordes, maybe more. But do you remember? I don't know if you were alive then, but do you remember when Concorde got taken down because it was flying on the flight path to take off, and the plane that took off before it had something had fallen off it, apparently. I mean, how random is that? How really? So a piece of metallic structure fell off the big old jumbo jet in front as Concorde was coming to take off. That metallic structure somehow got embedded in the body of Concorde, and Concorde went up and exploded. And because of that accident, the entire fleet of Concorde was taken down. Why? Why? And why is it when I take a plane, and I've taken like 10 in the last 2 months, too many, I'm sitting on this plane and I'm told, oh, this is a new plane. I'm like, well, it's rubbish. Sorry, because I know the lies, and I'm so frustrated beyond.
Well, can I just say, Danny, with that logic, we should technically be removing cars, because car crashes happen every day.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactamundo. Oh my gosh. It is frustrating. It is coming to, it's complete revelation. And we just invite people to think individually, and then I used to be with a man who'd be like, I'd be talking like this, like I'm talking to you. And he'd be like, no, that's wrong. No, 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 I don't want you reading that. And I'd be like, bye. We cannot
Right.
allow a mom, a dad, brother, sister, lover, whatever, friend, colleague, boss, to stop us thinking. Don't let anyone stop you thinking.
It's
Oh, God
unfortunate
won't
because a
like
lot of,
it. Which God? Sorry.
it's unfortunate because, to your point, a lot of times I can even speak from personal experience. A lot of that pushback tends to, a lot of times one would hope to expect that it would come from an external individual or source that is not necessarily within your inner group or family or etc. But a lot of times it comes from within.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the repression outside of us, it comes from the most incredible arenas. And then when there's fear attached, ridicule, shame, threats, but casting out, one of the
Yeah.
biggest fears for a human is isolation. Isolation. That's brilliant. That
Right.
is a brilliant war tool, isolation. But lucky I don't care. We get to the
Right.
point where we're like, not to put myself out on the firing line, but if I worry what people think about me, and having the courage, I believe, because of what I feel I've truthfully come to understand, and I will I will publicly be wrong. If I'm wrong, I will own it. but what if I'm not? And what if you're not? What if we are not? And I don't think we are wrong. And I think we should be speaking to every subject we're speaking here today. Let me check the time because I'm doing an inner earth drop with Elena Danan soon rather. Is there anything here that you think we should also touch on? Anything else you have prepared to show us, share with us?
I mean, well, I will tell you, Dani, that it's been an absolute blast. In about 5 or 10 minutes, I myself was going to say that I do have to take off, but I can the free flow and the energy of this conversation, I can go on for hours with you. So, in terms of trying to convey to yourself and to your lovely audience what essentially to introduce myself to those that are not familiar with me and all of that, I believe that I've humbly and graciously said more than enough. But I mean, if you would like for me to ever come back to discuss, to focus in or zoom in or zone in on some more specific topics, I'd be more than happy. But I can tell you that we can go in any and every direction that you and your audience would like, perhaps at another for another recording.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us what you feel is also your expertise to a point, and then we can invite the audience to vote on certain subjects and you giving us more of an insight.
Oh, sure. Well, from the perspective of, and I really appreciate that. And I do have a bit of a difficult time saying this because I don't really consider myself an expert in anything. I just consider myself someone that's curious. But one thing I can tell you that I tend to specialize in with extreme interest would be more so medical healing, the human biofield, and propulsion in particular, although it is not limited to that. I'm also very much interested in various forms of, we could talk about, for example, various forms of fusion, various forms of power generation for, free energy, for example. I'd be more than happy to discuss and give some little tips and tricks to your lovely audience next time around as to how one could, if they would like, could power their homes with very small amount of financial investment and using just the ground and the soil of the earth itself, mixed with some copper and some wood and all of that.
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
In terms of over unity, as it's been called, free energy, anti-gravity, the human biofield, the medical aspect of things, the medical field in various different areas of the medical field, some of which has not even been known to North Americans. For example, something called linguistic wave genetics, which has to do with words having genuine meaning and information qubits or quantum bits behind, like ones and zeros, that can heal and help people and have been doing so in certain parts of former Soviet countries. So I basically have interest and specialize in all of that, and I consult for all of that as well. So any of those fields, in addition to any of the ones I perhaps didn't think to bring up at the moment.
Well, there's rather a lot there, my darling, rather a lot.
Yes.
We just invite people in the live chat right now to put a 1 if you would like Dave Rossi to come back, and also under the comments section. I just heard a noise that I should not have heard here in this house. That's interesting. Anyway, yeah, everyone put a 1 for the return of Dave Rossi, and be specific about the subjects you'd like him to raise. It's always broken my heart, being an English person who's lived in I've lived in Canada, Costa Rica, Hawaii. I know people say Hawaii is America. Of course it isn't. It's a landmass 5,000 miles away from America, or 5 hours flight away. And I know there's it's like the English, when the English lie and they say, oh yes, we own Hong Kong, or we own India, in the past, because they're
right.
invaded. No, the Roman Empire still exists, of course. That's the Vatican.
Right.
But, it's made me sad for so long that, America, this beautiful, beautiful country with its rich history and its rich architecture, which of course its history doesn't go back 250 years because it was already settled by our beautiful indigenous, right? We got a massive rich history in America. But, and America's been built up in the minds of the Americans to be the greatest power on earth. And maybe, but on some levels, but it's so sad to me when I come and I go, oh, they don't know about this and they haven't been told about this. And that's so wrong, for the Americans. Well, they're not all Americans, of course. They're just people that live on the land mass of America. Does America even know where the name America came from? America is named after an Italian cartographer called Amerigo Vespucci. So the
To
name.
your point, to your point, Danny. I've come to the conclusion and understanding with personally with myself that I applaud you, by the way, for having the energy and courage to speak in that regard. Because for me, I've tried many times with many individuals, many times successful, but many times not successful, to the point where to me it's sort of like my head is going to just explode if I try and constantly explain to people that are not saying that they need to believe me, but people that are not even open to hearing what has to be, what certain things I feel need to be said. That's when people are so, certain individuals are so closed off. That's when I kind of go, okay, there's truly no point. And that's why I applaud you for having the courage and energy and tenacity that you do to try and still continue to educate many on the genuine reality of what's been suppressed.
Of their beautiful country and their beautiful selves. And one more thing while we're on it, something that I found absolutely heart crushing and devastating, because unless you're in a country, you largely don't know everything. You can only surmise or read. But when you do live in a physical country, you see things that you necessarily wouldn't have seen before. When I was in England, I would see that image of the forefathers at Lake Rushmore, at Mount Rushmore, you know, the original forefathers, that
Yes.
sculpture. Well, when I first saw it, because I wasn't told what it was, I honestly, hand to the gods, I thought it was a Disneyland ride because it looked like it. Okay. And then I
Right.
understand, to the horror and upset of a real patriot. Oh my God, Danny, you're so ignorant. That's our forefathers. And I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry. You know, I'm from Britain. We don't get programmed into that knowledge. We didn't know that. But
Right.
then when I thought about it, I thought, well, why did they pick that particular mountain? Oh my God. When I found out, I mean, it's not
There's a I think I know where
right
you're
now,
going.
Dave. No, Dave, the American government, they did that. They came in and they built those four gigantic, another Italian sculpture did that. It was commissioned to do it. They put their faces on the country they took over, that they took away from the indigenous that were already here. And they, because originally it was the six grandfathers, it was this, you can still see original pictures of that mountain. It was this outline of these six beautiful beings, and they
Mm,
took it and they took it and they crushed it, and they knew that all the indigenous tribes every year meet at that mount, and they come together and they pray and they worship, you know, they honor the earth, which most religions do not. And that was taken from them, and I it's in my blood. It crushes my heart. It's so sad to me that that happened to our people, our global people. And again, so many people don't know that. They're not taught that in schools. They're not taught that in general. This is
right.
of disclosure, Dave Rossi. All of
Right.
these truths and systems too. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. The realization of a lot of people asking quite often what can be done to sort of allow themselves to, I guess, wake up. And my personal opinion is I don't have a direct answer for each individual, because it's very internal and personal for many, in the sense that one needs to, in my opinion, dissolve the ego at first. And I don't claim to be perfect myself in any regard in that sense, but to dissolve the ego, to then be open to considering things that completely would, dare I say, crush the current worldview of many, most things, really.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, there's going to be such heartbreak and shock and horror when people really do accept in themselves that they have been lied to, they've been manipulated, they've been abused and used in horrible ways. But not to get angry and rageful, but to acknowledge and then do the healing so they can come out strong.
Right, not to turn it into some type of witch hunt, rather, but to realize what should not be allowed again.
Yeah. You know what else is
Right.
interesting on the word witch hunt? The Salem witch hunts never ended. They never ended. They go on to this day with one person or one group say, "Ah, ah, ah," right? That's how it
Right.
works. But you know, the original Salem witch hunt, which was certain amounts of people who were accused of having too much power, la la la. Do you know why they ended? I'll tell you. That Salem witch hunt only ended when the judge's own wife was accused of being a witch. And then
How ironic.
miraculously, it ended. It ended.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right, my darling. Well, this has been really good fun. And again, I hope not too upsetting or too offensive for some people. And if it is offensive and you get triggered, my darling, look at that. Why are you triggered? Don't be mad at me. Look at why you're triggered. Whoops. Because what's happening is the programming inside of you and all of us, the programming is being tapped, tap, 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 tap. Our opportunity to delete unworkable technology or programs that don't serve humanity and the greater good, the greater good. Dave Rossi, my darling, let me come to you for final words, please. What would be your message to the beautiful that we'll see?
Just to ask people very kindly to, dare I say, attempt to put some type of perhaps mirror in front of themselves with respects to an inner standing, as some of my members on Patreon, patreon.com/Generation Z speak about this idea of inner standing instead of understanding, which, as you said very eloquently, Dani, in saying, for example, no matter what occurs in one's day-to-day life, when something is bothering them, to ask themselves, why is this triggering me, instead of constantly externally trying to point at an external material source or other person as the problem. One begins to realize that, in my opinion, a lot of things in one's life, in all facets and aspects, begin to lock in, for lack of a better term, when one begins to, in my opinion, behave very much like water going down a river, in the sense that if we are water going down a river and a rock represents a problem, we deal with the problem when it comes, if it comes, and we flow around and shape ourselves to the circumstances of what's arisen, rather than try and constantly penetrate and force ourselves against something that is very difficult to completely just move or eradicate. And that metaphysical understanding or interpretation can then be scaled up to that of physical invention of technologies, et cetera, realizing that by helping oneself, you are ultimately helping others in the big picture and long term, the same way that these we could say these UAP or these craft operate as well, in which I've stated publicly before, I believe to be a nuts and bolts version of what our bodies are already doing organically. So that's normally that's what I would like to leave it at. And I want to thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart, Dani, for having me on. And it's truly been an absolute blast.
Dave Rossi, thank you so much. My pleasure too. Like I say, I came across you through Elena Danan and Dr. Michael Salla, who are good friends of mine. And I wanted to, have you stand accountable, in bringing the truth that you claim you have. And I think you did a really good job today, and we're really, really helpful and useful. And, people will come and find you and help to develop their own scientific minds, potentially their own patents that are here, for the greater good and to help humanity. So I send you my love, Dave Rossi. And
thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, darling. And to you guys out there, to the beautiful audience that will see this, I send you love, and know that we are in the tsunami of love. We are in the tsunami of revelation now. And let's all stand shoulder to shoulder and hearts to hearts together and take care of ourselves first, and then our brothers and our sisters. I will see you all soon.